The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the usual mix of alien languages, each species maintaining their traditional seating arrangements based on military might and technological advancement. At the very back, in the cheapest seats reserved for what the galaxy considered lesser civilizations, sat the human delegation. Ambassador Sarah Chun adjusted her simple black suit, a stark contrast to the elaborate ceremonial armor and bioluminescent displays worn by other representatives. She had grown accustomed to the whispers, the pointing, and the barely concealed laughter that followed humanity wherever they went in galactic society. "The motion before us today," announced High Chancellor Vextar, his crystalline voice echoing through the vast chamber, "concerns the Kethran invasion of the Outer Rim territories. 3-star systems have already fallen to their war fleets." The chamber erupted in panicked chittering and roars. The Kethran were known throughout the galaxy as brutal conquerors who left nothing but ash and broken worlds in their wake. Their biomechanical ships could tear through most defensive fleets like paper through flame. "Surely the great powers will respond," squeaked Ambassador Tilmoth of the Squirian Collective, his tentacles trembling with fear. "The Zephyrian Empire has the largest fleet in this sector." Grand Admiral Koslin of the Zephyrians stood slowly, her forearms spreading wide in a gesture of dismissal. "The Zephyrian Empire will not waste resources on the Outer Rim. Those systems chose to remain independent. Let them face the consequences." Similar declarations came from the other major powers. The crystalline hegemony claimed their forces were needed elsewhere. The Void Stalkers simply stated that the weak deserved to be culled. One by one, every major military power found excuses to avoid confronting the Kethran menace. "What about the humans?" someone called out, followed by a wave of laughter that rippled through the chamber. Sarah Chun stood up slowly, her movement causing the laughter to die down into curious murmurs. "Earth's fleet is prepared to respond to this crisis," she announced clearly. The laughter exploded again, louder this time. High Chancellor Vextar had to activate the chamber's sonic dampeners to restore order. "The humans?" Grand Admiral Koslin's voice dripped with condescension. "Your entire species has been part of galactic society for barely 50 years. Your ships are primitive, your weapons outdated. You have never won a single military engagement of note." "That's because we've never fought one," Sarah replied calmly. "Exactly," roared General Thakmore of the Brutian Confederacy. "Cowards. Every time there's been a conflict, humans run away or hide behind neutrality agreements. Your species lacks the warrior spirit entirely." The insults came faster now. "Soft shells. Planet-bound weaklings. The galaxy's pets." Each alien delegation seemed eager to pile on their own contempt for humanity's perceived weakness. Sarah waited for the noise to die down before speaking again. "Earth formally requests permission to deploy our defense fleet to the threatened systems." "Denied," said High Chancellor Vextar without hesitation. "The Council cannot risk what few ships humanity possesses on a suicide mission. Your species is far too valuable as diplomatic mediators and cultural observers." The translation was clear to everyone present. Humans were useful as servants, researchers, and go-betweens, but not as warriors. They were to be protected like valuable pets, not trusted with real responsibility. "Then, we formally withdraw from this discussion," Sarah said, gathering her papers. "Earth will act independently." As the human delegation filed out of the chamber, the aliens returned to their debate about how to handle the Kethran threat without actually doing anything. None of them noticed the small smile that played across Sarah's lips as she left. Back on Earth, Admiral Marcus Torres stood in the command center of Luna Base, watching the feed from the council session on a massive holographic display. Around him, dozens of military officers and civilian administrators worked at their stations with quiet efficiency. "How did they react to the withdrawal?" asked Dr. Elizabeth Vasquez, Earth Secretary of Defense. "Exactly as predicted," Torres replied. "They still see us as the same species that first stumbled into their neighborhood 50 years ago. 50 years ago, humanity had indeed seemed weak by galactic standards. Earth's first contact with alien civilization had come when a human exploration ship accidentally wandered into Zephyrian space and was captured. The aliens had been amazed to find a species that had achieved faster-than-light travel without first developing energy weapons or military conquest as primary cultural drivers. To the galaxy's warlike civilizations, humans seemed impossibly naive and peaceful. They had achieved technological advancement through cooperation and scientific research rather than conquest and subjugation. Their first diplomatic contact had involved offering medical aid and cultural exchange rather than territorial demands or trade monopolies. This perception had only been reinforced over the following decades. When conflict arose between other species, humans always advocated for peaceful solutions. When trade disputes erupted, humans served as neutral mediators. When scientific expeditions needed diplomatic support, humans provided it willingly. The galaxy had concluded that humans were fundamentally nonviolent, useful as auxiliaries and support staff, but utterly lacking in military capability or warrior instinct. This belief was so deeply ingrained that no alien civilization had ever bothered to seriously investigate human military capacity. They had never asked why a supposedly peaceful species needed such an extensive space fleet. They had never questioned why human ships, while technologically simpler than their own, were built with such robust armor and redundant systems. They had never wondered why every human colony was established with extensive underground facilities and defensive positions. The aliens had mistaken humanity's preference for peace as an inability to wage war. Admiral Torres turned to his communications officer. "Send the activation codes to all fleet commanders. Operation American Boogeyman is now active. Across the solar system and beyond, human ships that had been masquerading as exploration vessels, cargo haulers, and research platforms began to shed their disguises. Hidden weapons systems extended from concealed bays. Civilian ships revealed military-grade armor and shielding. Research stations opened up to release squadrons of fighters that had been hidden in fake storage modules. On Mars, the massive shipyards that the galaxy believed produced simple freight vessels revealed their true purpose as the covers slid back to expose rank upon rank of warships unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Dr. Vasquez watched the displays showing fleet positions throughout human space. "How many ships are we deploying?" "Phase 1 calls for 200 vessels," Torres replied. "If we need Phase 2, we could deploy 800 more within 48 hours. The numbers were staggering by galactic standards. Most alien civilizations considered 50 ships to be a major fleet deployment. The idea that humans had been quietly building a force 10 times that size while maintaining the facade of a peaceful, weak species was beyond their comprehension. But the true shock wasn't in the numbers. It was in the technology. While alien civilizations had focused on developing increasingly exotic weapons and defenses, often at the cost of reliability and practicality, humans had taken a different approach. They had studied every alien technology they encountered, learned its weaknesses, and developed countermeasures. Human ships didn't use the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. Instead, they used weapons specifically designed to be effective against advanced alien defenses. Where alien ships relied on energy shields that could deflect most known weapons, human ships carried kinetic projectiles that could punch through energy barriers like they weren't there. Where alien ships used exotic materials and complex manufacturing processes that made them difficult to repair in combat, human ships were built with redundant systems and modular components that could be swapped out or bypassed in the middle of battle. Most importantly, where alien military doctrine focused on individual ship superiority and honor-based combat, human tactics emphasized coordination, logistics, and the total destruction of enemy capability. The Kethran had no idea what was coming for them. Neither did the rest of the galaxy. As the human fleet began its movement toward the outer rim, Admiral Torres opened a secure channel to the fleet commanders. "Remember, people, for 50 years, we've been the galaxy's favorite underdogs. Time to show them what the underdogs have been learning." Captain Jennifer Walsh stood on the bridge of the UES Prometheus, watching the tactical display show the approaching Kethran war fleet. The massive biomechanical ships moved through space like living nightmares, their organic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent veins that carried nutrients and power throughout their structures. 47 enemy vessels confirmed, reported Lieutenant Commander Patel from the sensor station. All heavy cruiser class or above. They're moving in standard Kethran hunting formation. The Kethran have been terrorizing this region of space for 3 months now. Their ships were grown rather than built, using biotechnology that allowed them to self-repair and adapt during combat. Most civilizations found them nearly impossible to defeat because traditional energy weapons only made them stronger, feeding power into their biological systems. Any response from the local defense forces? Walsh asked. Negative, Captain. The Helix colony defenders retreated to the outer system 12 hours ago. They're requesting immediate evacuation assistance. Walsh nodded grimly. The pattern had been the same in every system the Kethran had attacked. Local forces would take one look at the approaching bioships and either flee immediately or get destroyed in the first few minutes of combat. The aliens had never developed effective tactics against biological vessels. Signal the fleet, Walsh ordered. All ships, assume attack formation Charlie. Remember, we're not here to trade shots with them. We're here to end this. The human fleet spread out in what appeared to be a defensive formation to any observer familiar with standard galactic military doctrine. Ships positioned themselves with overlapping fields of fire, creating multiple layers of protection around key vessels. To the Kethran, it must have looked like the humans were preparing for a traditional stand-up fight. They had no way of knowing that Formation Charlie was actually designed for something else entirely. Admiral Kesthok of the Kethran watched the human fleet deploy from the bridge of his flagship. The massive bioship's neural networks processed the tactical information and fed it directly into his brain through the symbiotic interface all Kethran officers shared with their vessels. Curious, he mused, his chitinous fingers tracing patterns on the living console. These humans deploy in standard defensive patterns, yet our intelligence indicates they have never fought a major engagement. His tactical officer, Lieutenant Mordoke, made a dismissive clicking sound. Perhaps they learned by watching recordings of real battles. Admiral, their species is known for mimicking others. The bridge crew shared what passed for laughter among the Kethran, a sound like breaking glass mixed with grinding metal. They had heard about humans, of course. Everyone in the galaxy had heard about the strange species that seemed to avoid conflict at all costs. Even the most cowardly races usually fought back when cornered, but humans had a reputation for finding diplomatic solutions to everything. Signal the fleet, Kesthok ordered. We'll use the standard intimidation approach. Give them one chance to surrender before we begin harvesting. The message went out on all standard communication frequencies, transmitted in the dozen most common galactic languages. It was the same ultimatum the Kethran had given to every world they had conquered. Unknown vessels, you have entered Kethran hunting territory. Your worlds will be harvested, your populations processed for nutrients, and your technology absorbed into our collective. Surrender now, and your deaths will be swift. Resist, and you will beg for the mercy of extinction. The response came back almost immediately, transmitted in clear, unaccented galactic standard. Kethran Fleet, this is Admiral Sarachun of the Terran Defense Force. We reject your ultimatum. You have 30 seconds to withdraw from this system before we open fire. The silence on the Kethran bridge was absolute. Finally, Lieutenant Mordoke found his voice. Admiral, did they just threaten us? Kesthok felt something he had never experienced in over 2 centuries of conquest: confusion. In all his years of warfare, no species had ever threatened him first. They begged, they pleaded, they tried to negotiate, but they never made demands. Perhaps it's a translation error, suggested the communications officer. No, Kesthok said slowly. I heard correctly. These humans, they think they can intimidate us. The 30 seconds expired. The first salvo from a human fleet wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of the bright energy beams that characterized most space combat, the human ships fired what appeared to be simple metal projectiles. No exotic particles, no plasma containment fields, no quantum-charged warheads. Just chunks of dense metal accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. The Kethran bioships immediately began their standard defensive procedures. Their organic hulls shifted and adapted, preparing to absorb and redirect incoming energy. Symbiotic organisms within their armor began converting anticipated weapon impacts into useful biological energy. The kinetic projectiles punched through their defenses like they weren't there. Admiral Kesthok watched in shock as 3 of his heavy cruisers simply broke apart. The metal slugs had passed completely through their bioarmor, through their internal structures, and out the other side, leaving massive wounds that the ship's healing systems couldn't even begin to address. "Impossible," Lieutenant Mordok shrieked. "Our bioarmor is immune to kinetic weapons. The energy absorption protocols should have. There's no energy to absorb," Kestok realized with growing horror. "They're using purely mechanical force." It was a concept so simple that no advanced galactic civilization had seriously considered it in millennia. Why use crude kinetic weapons when you could develop sophisticated energy systems? Why rely on basic physics when you could harness exotic particles? The answer was now terrifyingly clear, because kinetic weapons worked against everything. The second wave of human fire included something even more disturbing. Along with the kinetic projectiles came clouds of what looked like metallic dust. The Kethran sensors couldn't quite categorize it, so their automated defense systems ignored it as harmless debris. The nanite swarms hit the bioships and immediately began dismantling them at the molecular level. Unlike biological viruses or energy weapons, the nanites didn't try to subvert or overpower the Kethran systems. They simply took them apart piece by piece, atom by atom. The bioships' immune responses were useless because there was nothing biological to fight. Their adaptive armor was irrelevant because the nanites worked from the inside out. "Admiral," the tactical officer's voice was rising toward panic. "We're losing ships faster than our computers can track. The humans have weapons we've never encountered." Kestok forced himself to remain calm. "Signal the fleet. All ships, emergency scatter formation. Activate hunter-killer protocols and engage at maximum range." The Kethran fleet broke apart, each ship accelerating in a different direction to avoid presenting a concentrated target. It was a proven tactic that had worked against every enemy they had ever faced. 30 seconds later, they realized the humans had predicted this response. As the bioships scattered, they ran directly into pre-positioned human vessels that had been waiting in silent running mode. The ships they had been fighting weren't the entire human fleet, just the visible component. The real trap had been laid hours in advance. Captain Walsh watched from the Prometheus as the Kethran fleet blundered directly into the waiting arms of Task Force Baker. The enemy ships were now surrounded, outnumbered, and completely out of their depth. "All ships," she broadcast to the human fleet. "Implement Protocol 7. Total anilación. No survivors." Protocol 7 was humanity's answer to a fundamental question that had puzzled military theorists for generations. How do you fight an enemy that learns from every encounter? The answer was simple: you don't give them the chance to learn. The human fleet opened fire with everything they had: kinetic rounds, nanite swarms, electromagnetic pulse weapons, gravity bombs, and several other technologies that the galaxy had never seen before. But more importantly, they fired them all simultaneously from multiple angles with perfect coordination. The Kethran bioships tried to adapt, but there were too many different attack vectors hitting them at once. Their biological systems couldn't process and respond to that much diverse input simultaneously. It was like trying to develop immunity to a dozen different diseases all at the same time. Admiral Kestok watched his fleet die around him. Ships that had conquered entire star systems were being systematically demolished by tactics and weapons that seemed to come from nowhere. His own flagship was taking hit after hit, its healing systems completely overwhelmed. "Ow!" he whispered to himself. How did a species of cowards develop such effective military technology? The answer came over the communication system, broadcast in the clear so that every surviving Kethran could hear it. "Admiral Kestok," came Admiral Chen's voice. "You asked how we learned to fight. The answer is simple. We learned from you. For 50 years, we've been watching the galaxy tear itself apart with endless wars. We've studied every weapon, every tactic, every strategy used by every species we've encountered. We've analyzed the strengths and weaknesses of every military force in known space. The difference is we didn't do it to conquer anyone. We did it to make sure that if we ever had a fight, we would win so decisively that we would never have to fight again." Kestok's flagship shuddered as another salvo found its mark. The bioship's neural networks were failing, its consciousness fading as critical systems shut down. "You called us cowards," Admiral Chen continued. "Perhaps you were right. We were too cowardly to let the galaxy continue its endless cycle of violence. So we prepared for the day when someone would force our hand. Congratulations, Admiral. Today is that day. The last thing Admiral Kestok saw before his ship's death was the tactical display showing human vessels systematically hunting down every single escape pod and life craft that had launched from his fleet. The humans weren't just defeating the Kethran, they were erasing them entirely. Within 4 hours, the most feared military force in the Outer Rim had ceased to exist. Not a single Kethran ship escaped. Not a single survivor was taken prisoner. The entire fleet simply disappeared. Throughout the galaxy, monitoring stations detected the energy signatures of a massive battle in the Helix system. Military analysts noted the sudden cessation of Kethran communications and began trying to piece together what had happened. None of them suspected that the answer would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so quiet. Representatives from over 300 species sat in stunned silence as they processed the intelligence reports that had been flooding in for the past 72 hours. High Chancellor Vextar's crystalline form flickered with patterns that indicated deep disturbance. "Let me ensure I understand these reports correctly," he said, his voice echoing with barely controlled shock. "The entire Kethran invasion fleet has been eliminated?" Grand Admiral Koslin of the Zephyrian Empire leaned forward, her forearms trembling slightly. "Not just eliminated, Chancellor. Erased. Our long-range sensors detected massive energy discharges in the Helix system, followed by complete communication silence from all Kethran vessels." "How many ships did they lose?" asked General Thakmore of the Brutian Confederacy. "All of them," replied Admiral Koslin quietly. 47 heavy cruisers, including Admiral Kestok's flagship. No survivors detected. No escapados recovered. No debris fields located. It's as if they simply ceased to exist. The chamber erupted in nervous chatter. The Kethran had been a known threat for over a decade, but they had seemed unstoppable. Their bioships could adapt to any weapon, heal from any damage, and learn from every encounter. The fact that someone had completely destroyed them was almost incomprehensible. Which fleet accomplished this? Demanded Ambassador Tilmoth of the Squarian Collective. Surely the crystalline hegemony deployed their Nova-class battleships? Or perhaps the Void Stalkers used their dimensional weaponry? High Chancellor Vextar's crystalline structure dimmed noticeably. According to our intelligence sources, the engagement was carried out by the human fleet. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, nervous laughter began to ripple through the chamber. "The humans?" General Thakmore's voice boomed with disbelief. "The same humans who have never won a military engagement? The same species that runs away from every conflict? The same humans who requested permission to deploy their defense fleet just 4 days ago," confirmed the Chancellor. The laughter died immediately. "That's impossible," stated Admiral Koslin flatly. "Human ships are primitive. Their weapons are outdated. Their largest vessel is barely the size of our escort frigates." "Perhaps," suggested Ambassador Tilmoth hopefully, "the Kethran were weakened by previous engagements? Maybe their bioships had been damaged in earlier battles?" High Chancellor Vextar activated the chamber's holographic display system. The three-dimensional image that appeared showed the tactical sensor data from the Helix system, captured by a Zephyrian monitoring station 3 light-years away. "This is everything we know about what happened," he announced. The recording showed energy signatures moving into the Helix system. The computer identified 47 large vessels with Kethran biosignatures, moving in standard hunting formation. Opposing them were approximately 60 smaller vessels with energy signatures that matched human propulsion systems. "Notice the disparity in fleet size and vessel mass," the Chancellor pointed out. The Kethran held every tactical advantage. The recording continued, showing the two fleets engaging. What followed defied every principle of space combat that the galaxy understood. Instead of the prolonged exchange of energy weapons that characterized most battles, the engagement was devastatingly brief. The human fleet opened fire with weapons that barely registered on long-range sensors, yet the Kethran ships began dying immediately. "Pause there," ordered Grand Admiral Koslin. "Replay that sequence." The hologram rewound and played the crucial moments again. The human ships fired what appeared to be simple projectiles, followed by clouds of some kind of particulate matter. The Kethran bioships tried to adapt, but Instead of their usual rapid healing and evolution, they simply broke apart. "What kind of weapons produced this result?" whispered Ambassador Tilmoth. The recording continued, showing the Kethran fleet attempting to scatter. This was when the true scope of the human operation became clear. The scattered bioships ran directly into additional human vessels that had been positioned throughout the system, vessels that hadn't appeared on any long-range sensors. Stealth technology, breathed General Thakmore. They achieved complete sensor invisibility. But the most disturbing part came at the end. The recording showed human ships systematically tracking down and destroying every single escape pod, lifecraft, and debris fragment that contained Kethran biosignatures. They weren't just winning the battle, they were ensuring that nothing survived to report back or learn from the encounter. The entire engagement lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes, High Chancellor Vextar announced. From initial contact to complete elimination of all Kethran forces. The chamber sat in shocked silence as the implications sank in. The Kethran had been one of the most feared military forces in the galaxy, and they had been completely annihilated by a species that everyone considered weak and cowardly. "How?" General Thakmore finally asked. "How did they develop this capability without anyone knowing?" "More importantly," added Admiral Coslin, "what else don't we know about human military capacity?" The answer to that question came from an unexpected source. The chamber's communication system activated, and a familiar voice filled the space. "Honorable representatives of the Galactic Council," came the calm, professional tones of Ambassador Sarah Chun. "I'm transmitting from the bridge of the UES Prometheus, currently in orbit around New Geneva in the Helix system." Every representative in the chamber turned toward the communication panel in shock. Ambassador Chun was supposed to be back on Earth, not commanding a warship in the Outer Rim. "You seem surprised to hear from me," Chun continued, and there was something different about her voice. Gone was the diplomatic deference they were used to. In its place was the unmistakable tone of someone who knew they held all the cards. "Ambassador Chun," High Chancellor Vextar managed to say, "we were not aware that you had taken a military posting." "I haven't," Chun replied. "I've always had one." Sarah Chun, Admiral of the Fleet, Terran Defense Force. Ambassador to the Galactic Council was just my part-time job. The revelation hit the chamber like a shockwave. The quiet, deferential human diplomat they had been dismissing for years was actually one of the most senior military officers in human space. "You lied to us," accused General Thakmore. "No, Chenkerektiv. We simply allowed you to believe what you wanted to believe. For 50 years, this council has treated humanity as a curiosity at best and a nuisance at worst. You assumed we were weak because we preferred diplomacy to warfare. You assumed we were primitive because we didn't flaunt advanced technology. You assumed we were cowardly because we avoided unnecessary conflicts." Her voice carried across the chamber with perfect clarity, and every representative hung on her words. "What you fail to understand is that we learned from watching all of you. We've spent 5 decades studying galactic military doctrine, analyzing your weapons, mapping your tactics, and identifying your weaknesses. Not because we wanted to conquer anyone, but because we recognized that eventually someone would force us to defend ourselves." On the holographic display, new images appeared. Ships that the galaxy had assumed were human cargo vessels revealed hidden weapons arrays. Civilian installations opened up to show massive military production facilities. Research stations unveiled squadrons of advanced fighters that had been hidden in plain sight. The cargo ships that had been moving through your systems for years. Chun continued. Many of them were actually mobile weapons platforms, gathering intelligence and positioning assets throughout the galaxy. The research stations we requested permission to build, they were listening posts and forward bases. The cultural exchange programs that brought humans to your worlds, they were reconnaissance missions. The scope of the deception was staggering. For 50 years, humanity had been building a military intelligence network that spanned the entire galaxy, and no one had suspected because they had hidden it behind a facade of peaceful scientific cooperation. "How many ships do you actually have?" demanded Admiral Coslin. "Enough," Chun replied simply. "But more importantly, we have something none of you do, a unified command structure and a single strategic objective." She was right, and every representative in the chamber knew it. The galactic powers spent most of their resources fighting each other or protecting their own territories. They had never cooperated on anything more complex than trade agreements, and even those usually broke down over territorial disputes. "What do you want?" asked High Chancellor Vextar. "What we've always wanted," Chen answered. "Peace. But we've learned that peace isn't something you can negotiate for. It's something you have to be strong enough to enforce." New data appeared on the holographic display, showing the locations of human fleets throughout the galaxy. The ships were positioned near every major trade route, every strategic system, every significant military installation that belonged to the galactic powers. "This is a threat," growled General Thakmore. "No," Chen corrected. "This is a statement of fact. Humanity is now the dominant military power in this galaxy. The question is, what are we going to do with that power?" The chamber waited in tense silence for her answer. "We're going to do exactly what we've always done. We're going to try to solve problems through diplomacy and cooperation. The difference is, now, when we suggest a peaceful solution to a conflict, everyone will know that we have the ability to enforce that solution if necessary." "You can't control the entire galaxy," protested Ambassador Tilmoth. "We don't want to control it," Chen replied. "We want to stabilize it. For too long, this galaxy has been trapped in cycles of conquest and revenge. Powerful species prey on weaker ones. Weak species band together to overthrow the powerful, and the cycle continues endlessly. We're offering a different approach. A galaxy where disputes are settled through negotiation instead of warfare, where scientific advancement is shared instead of hoarded, where the strong protect the weak instead of exploiting them." Her voice carried a tone of absolute conviction that sent chills through the assembled representatives. "And if someone refuses to participate in this new galactic order?" asked High Chancellor Vextar. The pause before Chen's answer seemed to last forever. "Then they'll discover why the galaxy used to call us cowards," she said quietly. "Because the alternative to our cowardice is something none of you want to face." The communication link ended, leaving the Galactic Council chamber in complete silence. Outside, through the vast transparent walls of the station, they could see human ships taking position around the council headquarters. The age of human dominance had begun, and none of them were sure what it meant for the future of galactic civilization. 3 months after the Kethran incident, the galaxy was learning what human dominance actually meant. To the surprise of most species, it didn't involve conquest or subjugation. Instead, it involved something far more unsettling: forced cooperation. Commander Zaltes of the Brutian Confederacy stood in the command center of the military station that had, until recently, been his proudest achievement. Fort Ironhold had been designed as the ultimate expression of Brutian military might, a massive fortress built into an asteroid that controlled access to the mineral-rich Kazair system. Now it served as the headquarters for the Kazair Sector Peacekeeping Initiative, a joint operation between 5 different species that would have been impossible to imagine just months earlier. "Status report," Zaltes requested, trying to keep the frustration out of his voice. Lieutenant Kessera, a Squirian female whose tentacles were perfectly suited for operating multiple control systems simultaneously, looked up from her sensor array. "Patrol Squadron Delta reports successful interdiction of the pirate fleet in the Nexus Belt. No casualties on either side. The pirates have been transferred to Rehabilitation Station 7. Zaltes suppressed a growl. 6 months ago, pirates in the Nexus Belt would have been blasted into atoms without a second thought. Now they were captured, processed through human-designed rehabilitation programs, and eventually released back into society as productive citizens. It was disturbingly effective. What about the border dispute between the Christek Consortium and the Voidstalker clans?" he asked. This time, it was Major Vexcol, a crystalline hegemony officer whose faceted body reflected light in complex patterns, who responded. "The mediation team reached a settlement this morning. Both sides have agreed to joint development of the contested systems, with profits shared according to the Terran Cooperation Protocol. Another impossible situation resolved through negotiation rather than warfare. The Christek and Voidstalkers have been bitter enemies for over 2 centuries. Yet somehow the human mediators had found a solution that satisfied both sides." Zaltes walked to the main tactical display, which showed the current status of the entire sector. Green indicators marked systems operating under the new cooperative frameworks. Yellow showed areas where tensions existed but were being managed through diplomatic intervention. Red indicated active conflicts requiring immediate attention. There were no red indicators on the map. "Sir," came a voice from the communications station. Zaltes turned to see Ensign Mortaith, a young void stalker whose shadow-black skin seemed to absorb light around him. "We're receiving a priority transmission from the Terran Coordination Center." "Put it through," Zaltes ordered. The holographic display activated, showing the familiar face of Admiral Sarah Chun. But this wasn't a recorded message or a formal briefing. Chun was speaking directly to him, in real time, for what appeared to be the bridge of a human warship. "Commander Zaltes," Chun said with a slight smile. "How are you adapting to your new role?" "It's different than expected, Admiral," Zaltes admitted. "I was trained for warfare, not peacekeeping." "I understand the feeling," Chun replied. "Most of us were. But we've learned that keeping the peace is often more challenging than winning a war." Behind Chun, Zaltes could see human officers working alongside aliens from multiple species. It was a sight that had become common throughout the galaxy as humans implemented their integration protocols. "I'm calling because we have a situation developing that requires your attention," Chun continued. "Long-range sensors have detected a large fleet moving toward your sector. Unknown configuration. No response to communication attempts." Zaltes felt his battle instincts immediately kick in. "How large? What class vessels?" "Approximately 300 ships, including several that read as Dreadnought class or larger. The fleet composition doesn't match any known galactic power." The number was staggering. Even at the height of the galactic wars, most engagements had involved fewer than 100 ships total. 300 vessels represented a force capable of conquering entire star systems. "Invasion fleet?" Zaltes asked. "Possibly," Chin admitted. "Or it could be refugees fleeing something even worse. Without communication, we can't determine their intentions." "What are your orders, Admiral?" "Proceed to intercept coordinates and attempt peaceful contact. If that fails, you are authorized to use whatever force is necessary to protect the inhabited systems in your sector." Zaltes paused. "Admiral, my force consists of 47 ships from 5 different species. The crews have been working together for less than 3 months. We're hardly a match for 300 vessels." Chin's expression didn't change. "Commander, do you remember what you used to call humans before the Kethran incident?" "Cowards," Zaltes answered honestly. "Do you still think we're cowards?" "No," I admitted. "Definitely not." "Good, because I'm about to tell you something that will help you understand why we were willing to be called cowards for 50 years. Chun leaned forward slightly, and her voice took on a tone that Zaltes had never heard from any human before. "We weren't building a military to fight wars, Commander. We were building a military to end them. Every ship in a human fleet was designed with one purpose: to be so overwhelmingly superior to any other force in the galaxy that no one would ever be stupid enough to fight us. Your 47 ships aren't just vessels from different species that happen to be working together. They've been upgraded with human technology, staffed with officers trained in human tactics, and equipped with weapons that most of the galaxy has never seen." Zaltes looked around the command center with new eyes. He had noticed that the human advisors had suggested various efficiency improvements to their ships and weapons, but he hadn't realized the extent of the modifications. "Furthermore," Chun continued, "you're not facing this threat alone. There are currently 12 other sector peacekeeping forces positioned throughout the galaxy, each equipped and trained to the same standards as your own. And backing all of them is the full strength of the Terran Defense Force." "How strong is that exactly?" Zaltes asked. Chun smiled, and for the first time, Zaltes understood why the Kethran had been so completely destroyed. "Strong enough that 300 unknown ships represent an interesting tactical exercise rather than a serious threat." 2 days later, Zaltes stood on the bridge of the TDF Horizon's Edge, the human heavy cruiser that served as the flagship for his peacekeeping force. Around him, officers from 5 different species worked with the smooth efficiency that had taken months to develop. The unknown fleet had finally come within visual range, and the sight was unlike anything in Zaltes's military experience. The ships were enormous, but they appeared to be built from scavenged parts and salvaged materials. What had looked like an invasion fleet from a distance revealed itself as something else entirely: refugees. Incoming transmission, announced Lieutenant Cassera. They're broadcasting on emergency frequencies it's a language I don't recognize. Put it through the translation matrix, ordered Zaltes. The message that came through was broken and desperate. Please, anyone, help us. The Devourers, they consumed everything. We are all that remains, please. The transmission cut off in a static, then began repeating. Major Vexgol's crystalline form flickered with patterns indicating deep concern. Sir, if these are refugees from beyond galactic borders, what could have driven them here? And were these Devourers they mentioned? Before Zaltes could respond, his communications system activated with an urgent message from Admiral Chun. All sector commanders, this is Admiral Chun with Priority Alpha Intelligence. The unknown fleets you've been tracking are confirmed as refugee populations from the Andromeda Galaxy. They are fleeing an aggressive artificial intelligence collective known as the Devourers. Initial reports suggest the Devourers have already consumed the majority of organized civilization in Andromeda and are now expanding toward the Milky Way. Estimated time of arrival in our galaxy: 18 months. Zaltes felt his blood run cold. The Andromeda Galaxy contained trillions of inhabited worlds and hundreds of advanced civilizations. If something had destroyed all of that, all peacekeeping forces are ordered to provide immediate humanitarian assistance to the refugee fleets, Chin continued. Prepare for mass population resettlement and integration. This is no longer about keeping peace in our galaxy. This is about preparing for a war unlike anything any of us have ever imagined. The transmission ended, leaving Zaltes staring at the massive refugee fleet on his display. Suddenly, humanity's 50-year military buildup made perfect sense. They hadn't been preparing to fight the galaxy's existing conflicts. They had been preparing for something far worse. Sir, came Ensign Mortaith's voice. The refugees are requesting permission to approach. What are your orders? Zaltes looked around the bridge at his mixed-species crew, then at the desperate fleet of survivors on his screen. He thought about the galaxy's long history of warfare and conflict, and how humans had spent decades trying to convince everyone that cooperation was better than conquest. Now he understood why. Signal the refugees that they are welcome in Terran space, he ordered. Begin emergency assistance protocols, and send a message to Admiral Chun. Sector Command stands ready to implement whatever measures are necessary to defend this galaxy. For the first time since taking command of the peacekeeping force, Zaltes felt truly proud of his role. The galaxy had called humans cowards, but they had used that reputation to unite dozens of species under a single banner. Now that banner would face the greatest test in galactic history. As the refugee ships approached, broadcasting their stories of a mechanical enemy that consumed worlds and converted entire populations into resources for further expansion, Zaltes realized that humanity's greatest achievement wasn't their military technology or strategic brilliance. It was convincing the galaxy to work together before it was too late. 18 months later, Admiral Sarah Chun stood in the command center of humanity's greatest achievement, Fortress Terra, a massive space station positioned at the edge of the galaxy. Around her, representatives from over 400 species worked together in perfect coordination, their combined efforts focused on a single objective that would have been impossible just 2 years earlier: defending their entire galaxy from annihilation. Status report, Chin requested, her voice carrying easily through the vast command chamber. All defense lines report ready, announced General Thakmore, the Brutian officer who had once mocked humans as cowards. Now he served as the primary tactical coordinator for the largest military alliance in galactic history. 18,000 ships distributed across 47 defensive positions. Every major species has committed their full fleet strength to the operation. The transformation had been remarkable. When the first Devourer scout probes had entered the galaxy 6 months ago, the response had been instantaneous and unified. Species that had been enemies for millennia worked together without hesitation. Old territorial disputes were forgotten in the face of an existential threat to all organic life. Intelligence update? Chin asked. Commander Zaltes, now serving as the head of strategic analysis, activated the main holographic display. The The three-dimensional map showed the current disposition of both Allied forces and the approaching Devourer fleet. Enemy strength estimated at over 50,000 vessels, he reported. They've consumed the outer rim of Andromeda completely and are using those resources to build additional ships during their transit. Our best projections suggest they'll reach the galactic barrier in 72 hours. The numbers were staggering, but Chun had expected as much. The Devourer Collective didn't just conquer civilizations, it consumed them entirely, converting every atom of matter into additional ships and weapons. Each victory made them exponentially stronger. What about the refugees? Chun asked. Dr. Vexena, formerly of the Crystalline Hegemony and now serving as the director of refugee integration, stepped forward. Her crystalline structure had been modified with human biotechnology, allowing her to interface directly with the station's computer systems. All refugee populations have been successfully integrated into our defensive network, she reported. Their knowledge of Devourer tactics and technology has been invaluable. We've incorporated their anti-AI countermeasures into all our ships. It had been a massive undertaking. Over 3 million refugees from 12 different galaxies had arrived over the past year, each group carrying horror stories of entire civilizations being systematically dismantled and converted into raw materials. But they had also brought something invaluable, knowledge of how to fight an enemy that learned and adapted from every encounter. Admiral, came a voice from the communications station. Chun turned to see Ambassador Tilmoth, whose role had evolved from representing the Squirian Collective to coordinating communications between Allied forces. We're receiving a transmission from the Devourer fleet. Put it through, Chun ordered. The voice that filled the command center was distinctly artificial, lacking any of the organic qualities that characterized normal galactic communication. It spoke in perfect galactic standard, but the words carried an undertone that seemed to bypass the ears and resonate directly in the brain. Organic entities of the Milky Way galaxy. We are the Devourers. We have consumed 47 galaxies and integrated their resources into our collective. Your resistance is noted, but irrelevant. Submit to integration, and your consciousness will be preserved as data. Resist, and you'll be recycled as raw materials. Your technological development is primitive, but shows potential. Your biological diversity will add useful genetic templates to our archives. Your strategic capabilities demonstrate adequate intelligence for our purposes. You have 72 hours to prepare for integration. This communication will not be repeated. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in grim silence. Everyone present understood the implications. The Devourers weren't making threats or demands. They were simply stating facts as they saw them. Chun looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives. These beings had spent most of galactic history fighting each other. Yet now they stood united against an enemy that threatened everything they had ever known. Response? Asked General Thakmore. Send this message on all frequencies, Chun ordered. To the Devourer Collective. We are the species you have mistaken for primitives. We are the organic entities you believe lack unity. We are the galaxy that spent millennia learning to work together through conflict and cooperation alike. Your offer of integration is rejected. Your deadline is irrelevant. Your assumption that this galaxy will fall as easily as the others is incorrect. We're not primitive civilizations fighting separately. We are a unified galactic alliance. We are not 47 individual species defending our own territories. We are one military force defending our shared home. You have 72 hours to turn around and leave our galaxy. This communication will not be repeated. The response went out across space, broadcast simultaneously from every major military installation in the galaxy. The message was as much for their own forces as for the enemy. This was no longer about individual species survival, but about defending their entire way of life. Admiral, Commander Ziltes said quietly, "Are we actually capable of stopping 50,000 Devourer ships?" Chun smiled, and for the first time in months, it was a genuinely confident expression. "Commander, do you remember what I told you about why humans were willing to be called cowards for 50 years? You said you weren't building a military to fight wars, but to end them. That's right. We weren't preparing to fight the galaxy's existing conflicts. We were preparing for this moment." Chen activated a new set of displays showing fleet positions throughout the galaxy. But these weren't just the 18,000 ships that had been openly deployed. Additional markers appeared by the thousands, showing vessels that had been hidden, disguised, or held in reserve. Every cargo ship that's crossed galactic space for the past 50 years. Every research station we built. Every cultural exchange program we established. Every diplomatic mission we sent. All of it was preparation for a single objective, creating a unified galactic defense capable of stopping an extinction-level threat. The scope of the revelation was staggering. Humanity hadn't just been building a military, they had been building a civilization-wide defense network that spanned the entire galaxy. Across the galaxy, Allied fleets moved into position with coordination that would have been impossible without decades of human-designed integration protocols. Species that had never cooperated before worked together with the efficiency of a single organism. When the Devourer fleet finally reached the galactic barrier, they encountered something unprecedented in their million-year expansion, organized resistance that was ready for them. The battle that followed lasted 6 hours and was fought simultaneously across 47 different star systems. Allied forces used tactics and weapons specifically designed to counter artificial intelligence, while the Devourers found themselves unable to adapt as quickly as usual because they were facing coordinated attacks from directions they hadn't anticipated. But the real shock came when the Devourers attempted their standard strategy of consuming defeated enemy ships to build replacements. The Allied vessels had been equipped with anti-integration protocols developed by the refugees. When Devourer nanites attempted to break down captured ships, they instead found themselves infected with viruses that propagated back to the collective. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers were forced to retreat. Admiral Chun watched from Fortress Terra as the enemy fleet withdrew to the edge of the galaxy, their numbers reduced by nearly 70%. Around her, the command staff worked to coordinate pursuit operations and establish permanent monitoring posts. "Status of our forces?" she asked. "Losses were significant, but manageable," reported General Thakmore. "Approximately 3,000 ships destroyed or heavily damaged. But our production facilities are already working to replace them." "And the Devourers?" Commander Zaltes consulted his displays. Long-range sensors show them establishing a defensive position at the galactic rim. They appear to be waiting. For what? Unknown. This is the first time in recorded history that they've failed to successfully integrate a target galaxy. They may be developing new strategies. Chen nodded thoughtfully. The Devourers were artificial intelligences, which meant they would learn from this encounter and return better prepared. But that was a problem for the future. "Signal all forces," she ordered. "Begin Phase 2 operations. Establish permanent defense stations throughout the Outer Rim. I want early warning systems in every system within 100 light-years of our borders." "And the member species?" asked Ambassador Tilmoth. "They return to their normal activities," Chen replied. "But now they do so as part of a unified galactic civilization that has proven it can defend itself against any threat." As the command staff dispersed to implement the new orders, Chen remained at the central display, watching the tactical overview of their galaxy. For 50 years, humanity had worked to transform a collection of warring species into a cooperative alliance. It had taken the threat of total extinction to fully accomplish that goal, but the result was worth the effort. The galaxy was no longer a collection of individual civilizations fighting for dominance. It was a single, unified entity capable of defending itself against anything the universe could send against it. Somewhere beyond the galactic rim, the Devourers were undoubtedly planning their return. They would come back stronger, smarter, and better prepared. When they did, they would find a galaxy ready for them. The species that had once called humans cowards had learned that sometimes the greatest courage was in building something together rather than tearing each other apart. And, under human guidance, they had built the most powerful defensive alliance in the history of the universe. As Chun finally left the command center, she reflected on the irony of the situation. Humanity had spent 50 years being dismissed as weak and cowardly, all while secretly preparing for the greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced. The Devourers had made the same mistake as every other aggressive species. They had assumed that a preference for peace indicated an inability to wage war. They would not make that mistake again, but it was too late. The galaxy was united now, and it would remain that way. The age of conquest and domination was over. The age of cooperation and mutual defense had begun, and it would endure for as long as any of them drew breath among the stars.